And we are live on the YouTube machine. We are back again. We got a special edition, a special live stream tonight. We have got Alex Winter back, president of Hake's Auctions, back again to hang out with us. Alex, how are you doing, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, you guys, man. Well, so the last time I talked to you was just kind of going back as we were kind of rounding out the end of 2023, and you guys were slammed, kind of finishing out that year, that November catalog premiere auction was really, really busy for you guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. The end of the year always gets that way. I mean, we have the holidays to contend with anyway, but our final premiere auction of the year always ends in November. And so we're sort of trying to wrap that auction up, wrap up the end of the year, but at the same point, looking to what we're going to do at the beginning of the year. So it's, as I always say, there's never a day here that isn't a deadline day.
Yeah, no kidding. You guys are always up against due dates. How has it been as far as consignments go? Because it always amazes me how, I know you guys have such huge variety, but it always seems like the online auctions too, not just the premiere auctions, are always stacked with good items. I mean, how do you keep that flow going? I know you've got kind of longtime consigners and you guys you're getting your face out there at shows and different things, but how has consignment been as you kind of starting out 2024?
Very strong. Actually better than we ended last year with the November auction. I mean, we always have an idea of what we want to do with each auction, and we have some things in motion and we have some collections on hand, but a lot of what goes into the next auction is new to us between the end of that auction and the beginning of the next. So, but starting this year, we were very pleased with how the current auction ended up, the one that will end in March, and are already well ahead for the July auction as well. So again, we don't stop here every day. We're looking for consignments. We're talking to potential consigners. We're working on deals. We're taking trips to pick stuff up. Or we come in and we get a call and we find out, we've got to go somewhere to pick something up that we weren't expecting. So that's the most fun part of this whole job, is sort of, and also the worst part, right? The unexpected. So the unexpected as in, where's the next auction coming from? But also the unexpected of, we don't know what's going to show up. And when something incredible does, even after my 38 years here, our 57 years in the auction business, it doesn't get old from that standpoint of wondering what's going to be the next great object.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's almost got to be like treasure hunting in a way where, you just don't know what's coming. And even on this auction, I had reached out to you and you had pulled out a few items, and there's one behind you that we're going to talk about a little bit later. That is really unique. A quick tease. I'm a big 80s movie buff, scary movie buff, 80s horror movie. And so that's kind of a tease as to what we're going to talk about there. But we're going to start off. So there is one particular, I know we've got Collector's Dream in here. Orlando, good to see you, man. This card I'm going to pull up, I think, is one that will be of interest to Orlando and a lot of the vintage card collectors that do watch the show. This one is very interesting. Hold on, let me just pull it up here. All right, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, so we have got, and this is one. Now, I was going to ask you here, Alex, is this the same set as the big Babe Ruth that had sold recently?
So
1910.
That's 1914. So this is actually an earlier and first series of this particular issue. Yeah, so it predates that by 4 years. There is a done card in that set as well. This, though, is the only known example of this. And I want to give kudos to Phil Gary. That's our sports consultant, and he is a historian, an author. He's written several books on cards and baseball collectibles, and he does a lot of descriptions of the bigger pieces. So it's not really a description. It's almost a press release, right? So if you go to the website and bring this up, you'll see a fantastic description that he wrote. And in that, he notes that there are 12 cards from the set known, one per player, and that's it. Only one and one only. And this is the first time that this has ever surfaced at auction in a deep collection for many, many decades. And so essentially a new discovery to the hobby, freshly graded by CGC.
Interesting. Yeah. And so this was, the Baltimore News was a newspaper. Is that right?
Correct.
And so how did this come? I mean, I'm just trying to picture it again. And I'm not especially a pre-war vintage baseball card collector, but was this something that had to be cut out of the newspaper, or was it something that was kind of an insert into the newspaper? Do you know?
No, because there's a schedule on the back. So this would have been an insert, a handout, what they call a premium.
Okay.
So it would have been distributed for free in a variety of different means.
Interesting. Okay. So it's 4 years before the big Babe Ruth card that had recently sold.
But the tie-in with Babe Ruth is that, Dunn essentially is the person who discovered him.
That's right.
Signed him to the Orioles minor league team, got into some financial difficulty, had to sell several players, including Ruth, and Ruth goes to the Red Sox, and the rest is history. So it's kind of a neat little connection of Dunn, who was, I don't want to say he certainly wasn't a superstar. He played in the major leagues as well as managing and executive and so on and so forth, but certainly won't be a big name on his own. His real testament is Ruth, in which he even says his biggest regret was letting Ruth go. So,
yeah, that's so interesting. I didn't know anything about Dunn until fairly recently. Actually, I learned a little bit more about him because of that Babe Ruth sale. Sadly, I need to get up to speed on the pre-war stuff.
But a lot of it's unknown, like this, and we also have another card, the next lot in auction. Both are from this 1910 set and previously unknown. So as you get later in years, there's more documentation because the material is newer and people kept records. And some of this older stuff, pre-war, and even some baseball stuff from the late 1800s, there's not that much information. When we sold the Rich American Negro League and Cuban League collection a decade or more ago, that was unprecedented. I mean, there was a lot of stuff that we were offering that was one of a kind. Players hadn't been identified before. Teams hadn't been documented. So the earlier material, it gets quite difficult.
Yeah, Orlando has a question. Now he being Cuban himself, collects a lot of the rare vintage Cuban cards. He's asking anything like that in the future. I'm sure that you all see it come up from time to time. Is there anything in particular that you guys have seen?
There's going to be some more Rich American stuff coming up. In fact, Phil was just here recently and went through the mound of stuff that still remains even after a decade. That's how much material he has. I don't know what he picked out. There's nothing really in this auction. There will be some stuff. We're going to have an online only auction in May that will probably have some cards. And then certainly in July, we plan on having some more from that Cuban and South American material. But also he had a small but very interesting group of Japanese baseball cards, which we have done nothing yet with, but that is coming up as well. So some interesting American stuff down the road.
All right, good deal. All right, we're going to dance around a little bit here. So we will come back to the vintage baseball, the vintage sports stuff. Hang with me here, but I have to bring this up. And this is the one that you have, the piece that you have behind you, Alex, is, well, do you want to explain what it is? It's unbelievable to me, this piece.
Yeah. So, at first glance, you say, what is this piece of Wolverine art?
Yeah.
And I say that seriously. We just had this at OAX Art Expo in Orlando. That was a comic book centric original art convention. And we had this on display. And obviously that's your first reaction because it looks like that. It is, though, in fact, the very first art conceived and developed for the very first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. So done by an artist named Duncan Eagleson, who has done a lot of different things, advertising. He's done art for concert T-shirts. He did comic book work. He actually worked on Neil Gaiman's Sandman. And there was another title called Shade the Changing Man for DC, both for Vertigo imprint, both flagship titles of DC. He did a single issue of each of those. So he, at this point, was hired by New Line Cinema to work on movie poster art and promotional art, of which we have a couple other pieces in this auction. But this is the most interesting because it is for one of the most storied horror franchises of all time, one of the most recognizable, loved/hated film characters of all time, and Freddy Krueger.
Yep.
And so you might say, well, okay, why do you say Wolverine and why 3 blades or 3 claws? Well, he was working solely off of the script. There was no model sheet. There was no photo. There was no real concept of Freddy Krueger and his glove. So in his mind, he had 3 blades and 3 blades slashing through the sky over Elm Street. And so this art was first used, and we have a little, the black and white picture, if you want to bring that up in the top row, the second picture.
Yes.
That is what this was first used for. This was a trade publication to announce this project was being made and to try and raise funds to complete the project. So the very first exposure to Freddy Krueger, Nightmare on Elm Street came from this. Money got raised, the film got made, and then the decision was we should get a different artist, maybe a bigger name artist, to do the one sheet poster for the US, which is the one that everybody now knows and is embedded in brain with Freddy Krueger's claws over the victim. And so that was for the US release. Flash forward a couple years, and this gets released all over the world. They then went back to the original art and used that over and over and over again in different ways. Sometimes, as you see here, just the claws, sometimes the whole scene. So we flash forward again to the 20th anniversary DVD release, which we also have a picture of here, that one. They reuse that, but this time they add in, without asking Duncan, Freddy Krueger to the image. So again, just incredibly historic, but a lot of people don't know about it. Even deep horror fans, you know, that even collect movie posters and so forth, aren't familiar with how much this was used in all the years since its release. So as you said before, you know, how do you get things ready to come from? This has been in the works for quite some time. Duncan contacted us many years ago with art that he had from the Sandman comic that I mentioned. And so that was among the first things that we sold. And then he gave us some other things over the years. And as he's cleaning out things, he comes across this artwork and says, would anybody care? And I said, yeah. So this has really gotten a lot of attention for us. I mean, you can see it. I got it on the cover of our catalog. We made it that the sole item this time. I just thought it was so dynamic, a graphic. And it's been picked up by a lot of news agencies. Bloody Disgusting, which is a major horror site that promotes the new films and projects and so forth, picked this up, and we got tons of views from it. So it really is great to present this, not only, let's say, even to those that knew it existed or knew it was done, didn't know it existed, but so many others that didn't even know it existed at all. So this, again, go back to what I love most about this is not knowing what's going to show up next and hoping it's going to be a piece like this, which is, to me, in my 38 years of being here, in the top 10 coolest pieces we've ever offered.
I agree. I mean, now granted, I'm a scary movie guy, and this sort of thing wasn't really even on my radar. I've always thought of course, you have, you know, these old movie posters and first print movie posters, and those are collectible. And of course, you hear about original comic book art. You know, that's heavily collected. You know, if you look at original comic book art, I mean, people pay a lot of money for original artwork. And so, but this was never really on my radar as being, you know, original movie poster or movie art, you know, is really unique. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, it's also much rarer than comic book art. I mean, it just, obviously they made multiple millions of comics over the years, right? Not that there weren't a lot of movie posters, but not to the degree of comic books, and not to the degree that this art was saved. A lot of this art was destroyed. I mean, original one sheet movie poster art of any genre just does not come up that often, and let alone something of this magnitude.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Hold on, let me check back. Where are we sitting on that one? Do I still have that? Hold on, let me pull it back. Where's the bidding on this thing? $7,332.60 with 14 days to go. I want to watch it just to see where it goes. It's out of my range, but man, that's just an unbelievable piece.
This was when we really had no clue. You know, we looked at some comps, but the comps were all over the place, and really made no sense. I mean, I saw some art for a movie that was nothing special, bring a big price. Other movies that had more clout and didn't do so well. So just we put an estimate on everything. We feel that's important just as a guide, but strictly as a guide, because plenty of things go over estimate and some things don't hit estimate. So this was 20 to 35 estimate. We'll see. We opened it at 5. It got a number of bids over the first couple of days. We've only been online for a week. And as with any of our auctions or any kind of auction in the platform like we have, the bidding happens the last couple of hours. So while this may go up how many times more until then, it could be the last hour that it really explodes. So it'll be fun to see where it ends up.
I like how you guys don't have, well, the way that can you explain too quickly for those that haven't used Hakes yet, how the bidding ends?
Mm-hmm.
You place a bid and it kind of extends out. And then, can you just kind of walk us through that?
Sure.
So people know?
And it's funny you say this because that's exactly what is extended bidding. And it's what we've always had since we've been doing auctions. And I'm seeing more and more major auction houses adapt this format now because it makes the most sense. First of all, consignors certainly like the fact that you can't snipe an item or it kind of stays open. And if someone loses out on one item, they can jump back in on this. And again, for bidders, it's the most fair that it remains open until the last bidder places the last bid that they want to. So at 9 o'clock on our 2 closing days, Tuesday and Wednesday, we started 20-minute clock. If 20 minutes pass on any of those items, they close at 9:20. Any item that gets a bid after 9 then opens up for 20 minutes. So each individual lot opens up for 20 minutes. So it just kind of keeps going in waves and waves and waves until we get down to the last item that must go 20 minutes without a bid.
Yeah, I had to learn kind of. So on the last one, I have, and on this auction, I've got maybe 20 items on my watch list. And it's kind of exactly what you said. You're kind of watching and you're in your mind, you're prioritizing, okay, if this one goes, what's next? And it's kind of a fun game, really, if you've got, a bunch of things that you're looking at. But yeah, it works out really well, to where it just kind of gives a fair shot. There's not kind of the sniping or the weird, there's not really there's not really an opportunity to shill or anything like that. It's pretty cut and dry.
And look, again, there's no right or wrong. So every auction house is different in some way, shape, or form. No two are exactly alike, like a snowflake. But we feel this works best for us. We have the fewest complaints from bidders, no complaints from consignors. And if you don't want to get caught up in all that, you can also do a max bid. And there are some auctions where I know what I want to pay and that's it. I don't have to think about it. I put my bid in and I walk away, and you can do that as well. But if you're not sure, if you want to see where it goes, or if you want to see if you miss out on an item, where else can you go? Then this is the format that allows you to do that.
Absolutely. This is a popular item. I just pulled this back up. I know we got vintage baseball people that are watching. And this one already at almost $2,500 with 13 days to go. But let's talk quickly about the T205 Gold Border Cy Young PSA 3.
Yeah, so a classic. I mean, I don't have to really detail what it is, what the series is, who the player is. And it's 3 is a decent grade for this series. This is a card that's not going to break your bank, but you're going to get a key card from this set, a key Hall of Famer card, a classic card in general. This and all the pre-war, most of the pre-war, this auction and last auction, all came from the same collection. So again, you ask where things come from. This came from a collector who collected baseball his whole life, essentially as a kid. And then as an adult, really got serious in the 70s and beyond, has been a customer of ours for decades, started to thin out his collection. And we've been selling things for about a year or so now. He unfortunately passed away the end of last year. And his daughter gave us the rest of the estate, liked the way we had done, liked the way we had treated him. So for the next year, you're going to see a lot. Now, we're not using a pedigree. We're not stating who this person is, but a lot of what you are going to see that is pre-war is going to be from this collection, and it covers cards and photographs and autographs and pinback buttons. It's extremely deep and very interesting.
Okay. Well, all right, vintage baseball folks, you heard that there. There's going to be a lot of diamonds in the rough that are going to be coming to auction here at Hake's coming up this year. All right, let's see what we've got. I'm trying to mix it up a little bit between these. Sure. All right, I'm pulling up one that I just thought was really interesting. All right, the Dr. Seuss 1940s cartoon illustration. So this to me, if I'm reading this right, is original art going back to the 40s from Dr. Seuss. Is that right?
Correct. Most likely done as a newspaper or magazine cartoon. Unfortunately, unlike comic book art that is mostly always documented, and it'll be on comic book pages. It'll have an issue number, a page number, artist, writer, inker, all of that stuff. A lot of the cartoon art was just done and not documented. So maybe this is published, maybe it isn't. We don't know. It's interesting though, because it is fairly early in his career. He got started in the late 20s, but in the 30s and 40s, he did a lot of this kind of art, syndicate art, advertising art, magazine art. It wasn't until, decades later that he became the children's book illustrator and author that he is now famous for. Prior to that, he had a fairly modest career doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah, the thing with this sort of thing, it's kind of like when you look at, vintage Disney items, this is a piece of American history, pop culture, history, really. It's amazing. How many of these sorts of things pop up? I have to assume that you don't see these all the time.
No, his early art does not come up that often. Obviously, the more popular stuff is the Grinch and Cat in the Hat and so forth. Even if you just have doodles that he did and little sketches and things of that nature, can be more popular and bring more money than earlier stuff, right? This isn't like baseball cards where rookie card usually is king, and then as you get later, the value goes down. In this case, his more popular stuff is what people want more than this. But you have your early art collectors, your historians, and the people that like syndicate art, the daily strips, the Sunday strips, the cartoon art. So it has its own audience.
Absolutely. Are there before we go on to the next item, are there certain collectors that reach out to you like, hey, if you come across this, please let me know type thing that are just focused on that sort of original art? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. We've kind of got a database of people and what they're looking for. And when something shows up, we let them know ahead of time if we can, or that we're trying to get it, or there's many want lists that our customers have.
Absolutely. This is an obvious classic, a card that I would love to own at some point. I don't know if I'll ever own one, but a 51 Bowman Mantle rookie card in a 1/5 popped up here. And of course, most people, I would say, probably in the hobby know of this card, but anything in particular you wanted to add in here, Alex, other than this could be an affordable copy potentially?
100%. The main thing I want to add is this is his rookie card.
Right.
Not 1952 Topps,
not 52 Topps, right?
Which everyone get, and that is the king. It's always going to be value wise, but a lot of people don't realize this is the Mickey Mantle rookie card. And as you said, yes, 1/5 is still, it presents very nice. A lot of these lower grades have lower grades because they have different problems, but they're not significant to the eye. So as a 1/5, this still presents very nicely and will be affordable. And that's sort of one thing that we preach to, and we always have. And that's why we have the online auctions, which tend to be lower price material. Much of what sells in those online auctions is under $500, if not even in the $100 to $200 range. A lot of collectors in that range. We get to the $1 million item, fewer collectors in that range. So as a business, I like selling the big ticket items. That keeps the light on. Yeah. As a collector, I like items in all different price ranges. You don't always have to break the bank. So I think a lot of times we kind of get caught up in the hype, and all these big ticket record breaking prices are promoted. And so many people think, I can't be a collector. I can't afford that. Well, that could not be the furthest from the truth. There's lots of great affordable collectibles in all different areas, sports cards in particular, that you can have your own collection to be proud of. And it doesn't have to be the be all end all.
Yeah, I really don't mind a card like this. I mean, it's a 1/5, so you've got kind of the rounded corners. I don't mind rounded corners at all. I mean, if you look at this card too, the registration, yeah, he's got there's a little kind of stuff right around here, but there's nothing like majorly, obvious here kind of on the registration of the card. It looks, for a 1/5, it presents nicely.
Yeah. Look, and the further away you display the card, the more mint it looks, right? So put it across the room and you got a 10. You get up close, you got a 1/5.
So this one currently sitting at 38.50 with about 14 days to go. That's interesting. It's a nice 1/5. I'll say that. It is a nice 1/5. All right, let's see what is up next. I'm going to flip it over to a book actually that I have been looking at. Not in this high of a grade, but This is the 1965. It's Batman 171. It's his first Silver Age Riddler. If you're a comic book collector, then this is I would say this is a fairly decent sized key Silver Age DC book. And a 9.0, which is really high grade for this particular book.
Yeah, no, absolute key. And again, state first Silver Age appearance, first Golden Age appearance, Detective 140 in 1948. So, but those eras always get differentiated. So, first Silver Age appearance, sort of this was the tag says, this was the basis for the TV pilot of the 1966 show. Great cover. I mean, dynamic art, yes. And the background really pops. So yeah, and a 9.0 is a strong grade for this book.
Yeah, this violet cover too. It's like everything shows up on it, but this copy looks fantastic. You don't have, a lot of creasing, the spine looks really nice. I mean, this is a beautiful copy.
And that's just one of, we always have a big comic section. So about 300 graded comic books, and also we're selling more of what's called the Duke Caldwell collection, and those are all signed comics. So this was a longtime comic collector that went to conventions from the 70s on and had everyone from Stan Lee to Jack Kirby to Bob Kane. I mean, everybody imaginable signed comics. So a very interesting kind of sub collection of comic can be these signed comic books.
Absolutely. I want to flip over, actually, speaking of signed comic books, it seems to me that, well, this is kind of an obvious thing, but for vintage cards, it has become more in vogue. I know you've seen this too, Alex, to buy kind of these signed copies of vintage cards. I guess it adds a level of scarcity rarity, especially for a guy like Koufax, who's not around. He's not signing 1,000, autos, he's not Pete Rose at shows. These are really interesting pieces to me because, is that 57 top Sandy Koufax on its own a rare card? Not necessarily, but when you add in an autograph and then an autograph grade, it makes it really unique. I love these.
Yeah. And years ago, this was sort of the kiss of death. You got photos or bats or balls or whatever signed and not cards. That's changed, especially as autographs in general have taken off. Yeah. Same thing with comic books. That was kind of frowned upon. Now with CGC having a signature series and CBCS having their signed program for comic books, it's more fashionable, it's more collectible. It's funny, I'm a big record album collector. That was never an issue. If you had a Beatles signed record, that's what you wanted. So, but it was different in cards, but it's now changed. Certainly has helped that they are now authenticating and grading the signatures. And like this is a 9, so that's a very strong grade for the signature, but it's well placed. It's a bold signature. It's not covering his face. It's not covering anything important. I think this is, it said in the description, 1 of 4 in this grade in the population of the autograph, not the card, of the autograph.
Right. And Koufax has a really nice autograph there. Yeah. So that is a nice piece, sitting at 575 with about 14 days to go. So 14 days to go in this auction. Is there part 1 and part 2 to this one, Alex?
Yeah. So the 19th part 1 is always the historical baseball, sort of the real life stuff. Part 2, where the comic books, the toys, that kind of thing. So it's broken into 2 parts. Once you're on the website, it's kind of shows you the navigation of how it's divided. So
I wanted to pull this one up because this was another one. Again, current bid at 250. 53 Bowman, Stan Musial, but again, you've got a really nice auto grade here for an old card, and of course, a legendary player.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of 3 Stan signed cards. We also have his rookie card signed. I think that's a 6 or a 7. The signature on that is not as sharp as this. This is a great signature on this classic card, and this is all of these signed cards are from that collection I mentioned that we'll be selling over the next year or so. He was a very devoted autograph collector. And even back then, when it wasn't as fashionable to get cards signed, he was. So there will be hundreds and hundreds of signed cards coming up over the next year.
That's what I'll be watching. Yeah. And that's been kind of my struggle with vintage baseball, is kind of, because if you're not buying necessarily some of the higher grade stuff, then it is fairly available. But when you add in the autograph there, I love that kind of that differentiator.
Yeah. And look for it, as I keep saying, that we have different auctions, right? So we'll go premier cataloged auction, online auction, and alternate like that. So the May online exclusive auction will have, I think, at least a couple hundred signed cards from this collection in the more affordable range, but still Hall of Famers, key cards, all are PSA graded, and I should say double graded, card and autograph.
Yeah, and there's just so much range in these auctions, guys. If you're watching this live or if you catch it on the replay, I'm just going to pull up to this is one that just kind of struck me. And again, it's not, it's a Steven Spielberg autographed photo going back to of course, the classic E.T., the E.T. photo here, signed by Spielberg, probably a top 3 or 5 Hollywood director of all time. That was a piece I was watching. I might be kind of ruining this for myself, but I'm probably going to bid on this one just because I think it's just awesome.
No, it's great. When you're talking about it, Sandy Koufax, great signature. Steven Spielberg scribble, but that's his signature. I mean, it's authenticated. It's JSA authenticated. That's just how he signed. But yeah, on the classic photo with him with E.T. We also have one for he's on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's also this auction. But yeah, as iconic as it gets, right? I mean, he went from Jaws to Raiders of the Lost Ark and then E.T. I mean, his sort of that sweet spot of his films are all legendary movies, but probably, well, it's hard to say that's E.T. most beloved, right? Raiders has a huge following, but E.T.'s right up there.
Yeah, no one has. I mean, when you look at Spielberg's greatest hits chart, I mean, it's just unbelievable, the stuff that he made. It's incredible. All right, so a couple more pieces. The one I want to hit on, going back to kind of that vintage baseball flair here, is this Jackie Robinson magazine, because this is one, again, I've seen this before, but I don't remember the story behind it. I wanted to just kind of get a little bit more detail from you. It's CGC graded.
So the history of Jackie and comics does not start here. And I made notes because I wanted to get this right, because it's not in everybody's mind, comic collectors or baseball collectors, but he actually debuted in 1946. So rookie season in Picture News number 4. So that was a comic book that had world events and current events and movie stars, sports stars. In fact, issue number 6 had Joe Louis on the cover. So in issue 4, he wasn't on the cover, but there was a story about Jackie Robinson. Then in 1948, there was a short-lived comic series called Negro Heroes. He was in issue number 2 of that, and he was on the cover and in the story. But by the time, this comic rolled around, he was a legendary superstar. So this is put out by Fawcett Comics, who are most famous for Captain Marvel, right? Before DC owned Captain Marvel, Fawcett Publications put out Captain Marvel and Marvel Family books. This is technically an NN or no number because it was a trial. They didn't want to say number 1 and you think it's going to be a series. They wanted to see how this did. Well, it did well enough to launch a series, but not well enough to sustain the series. It only lasted 6 issues up to 1952. So this is technically a first issue, although it's called an NN. But sort of that's Jackie's history in comics when he was playing. It was not plentiful, but there are some really nice comics out there with Jackie. And obviously, this is a key one, being number 1, great image, double image on the cover.
Yeah, the cover is amazing. I mean, it just pops. The yellow, the red, and then he's got this great picture of him as well. Yeah.
And there's a lot of sports stars crossing over in the comics and so forth. But, Jackie is kind of special just because of the legendary player that he is, and that an African-American in 1952 graces the cover of a comic book, right? Black superheroes wouldn't make their prominence until decades later. So again, you have a trailblazer in Jackie Robinson in many different ways and arenas.
Absolutely. All right, we're gonna wrap up on. It's one of my favorite pieces outside of the Nightmare on Elm Street that you showed me, the original art. This, I can't even believe that this is that you actually have this. So if I have this right, this is a complete in box or a sealed version of the Eternia Battleground, the playset from Masters of the Universe, going back to the mid 80s.
Correct. Yeah, and that's sort of over in this direction there on the floor. It is massive. So in the 80s, toy lines like Masters and G.I. Joe started to go big with their play sets and accessories and things. G.I. Joe did the flag battleship, which is even bigger than this. But this is a massive plastic play set for the action figures. Now, it was preceded by Castle Grayskull. And then they also did Snake Mountain. And then they did this. And actually, all three of them connect together. This is very rare, especially sealed.
Yeah.
And in this grade. So what AFA does is if it would be open, they would put a Q, qualified. This is not that. This is a sealed grade. It is the highest graded example of this version. There is as you can see, the new is on the front of the box there. The second version that was removed, there is an 85 graded of that, but there are none higher graded for the first version. And you may say, well, that doesn't seem like a high grade for action figures. Getting a 90 is very difficult, near impossible. A 95 and 100, another level. It's like getting a 10 of a vintage card, not a new card. So the grade that this is in is a very, very high grade, and obviously tough to get a higher grade if none have surfaced yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable. This one just stuck out to me. Like, how is this even possible? It's kind of like, when we saw there was that recent sale of the O-Pee-Chee case, the 79 hockey case that went for $3.7 million. It's like, how does that still exist? And I guess that's the whole point is that there might only be one.
Again, sealed because, a kid didn't get this or they would have opened it up. So sometimes there's what's called old store stock. There will be some pieces that just never made it onto the store shelves, or went onto the store shelf and didn't sell, and then someone scrolled it away for whatever reason. But we're moving into, Star Wars really started a trend for toys, that is, of people saving things.
Yeah.
I'm talking about adults, right? Before that, there are no people got G.I. Joe and Barbie and whatever toys they played with them. They didn't think about saving them for the future, and not monetarily. Star Wars, there was just a crowd that really adult crowd that embraced that movie and wanted to save these things as mementos, as keepsakes. But in the 80s, that wasn't necessarily the case with stuff like this and G.I. Joe. It was very kid driven. So you didn't have adults buying this stuff to put this away. So that's why this kind of stuff, while it's later than the Star Wars, you see much more Star Wars than you do Transformers, and certainly Masters, and to some degree Joe and Thundercats, and on and on and on, those 80 properties. So you're now seeing kids of the 80s, grown up, disposable income, and going back and collecting this stuff, which is bringing 5 and 6 figures at times for action figures that even a decade ago was collected, but nowhere near the prices we're seeing.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. But you kind of nailed it. Especially the 80s, 90s was such a high time for pop culture. I mean, when you look at a lot of the, just look at Mario Brothers. They're building Super Mario Brothers Land or whatever in Orlando. I mean, all of these IPs that were built out in the 80s and the 90s are now really taking over. Whereas, and I feel like that's, and I've said this, but I feel like that's kind of a different trend than what we've seen before. It's not quite the same. If you go back to the 50s or the 60s, you didn't have kind of these mass produced, IP type stuff in the same way that are carrying on to multiple generations.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And then that's the big thing, sticking with generation 2, like Star Wars. You could have somebody that grew up on the later Star Wars films, but their parents grew up on the earlier Star Wars films, and they come together. Whereas other things, Westerns, for an example, I mean, Tom Mix, or you go to earlier comic characters like Yellow Kid. I mean, these are things that probably most of your audience doesn't even know what I'm saying right now, right? Because they haven't been sort of carried on. But yeah, these properties that you're mentioning and so forth have certainly a long shelf life at the moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Alex, thanks very much for coming on and talking about some of the awesome items that you have. It's always exciting for me, whether it's these premiere auctions that are every 3-4 months, or if it's the online auctions. There's a lot of really cool stuff that pops up over the year. So if you all are watching this, whether it's sports cards or non-sports or movie memorabilia stuff or whatever you collect, they've got just massive variety over at Hake's. Alex, anything that you want to wanted to say before we kind of wrap up here?
No, I mean, you just gave me a good promotion right there. Just watch the site, watch our social media, sign up for our email, just stay in touch with what we're doing. We have a lot of exciting things coming up. Like I said, we've got some amazing collections that I don't want to jinx, so we won't talk about them. But for the July auction, lots of great stuff, and some interesting things happening that this year. This is the year we hope to launch our new website and app and so on and so forth. So we have that. We're going to do more shows than ever, so you're going to see us a lot more out and about. And if you are at a show or convention, please stop by and say hi. And that's sort of about it. Just pay attention. We got big things in store.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, thanks again for coming on, man. And I look forward to the next one coming up.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank you, my man.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you later.